Hello, everyone. Over the past year, the past 18 months, there's been an incredible flowering of political activity in all sorts of places, online, on the streets, sometimes even in tents. And, I wanted to sort of pose the question, why is this happening? And why are so many people now getting involved in politics in its widest sense, where they weren't before? And, I can't give a comprehensive answer to this question, but I can at least tell you what happened to me. Now, my background is as conventional as you like. I grew up in a very middle-class family in Dorset. Books were important. We listened to a lot of Radio 4. I'm very aware that my experience growing up is not the experience that everybody had during the 80s, but I certainly came out of my childhood feeling, and there's a picture to make you all slightly more sympathetic to me than you would be otherwise. I hope that works. Like I said, books are important, and here you go. I certainly came out of my childhood with a sense of security and a sense that I lived in a country where everything basically worked relatively well, and everyone had a decent chance under the law, and if you worked hard, that hard work would probably be rewarded, as naive as that may sound. But I don't think that's uncommon to grow up in this country and have those kind of expectations. So from that point, I went to university. I more or less followed the rules, more or less, and partly because of that, maybe because of that early exposure to literature you've seen there, I ended up working in publishing. Ended up with a nice job, working in a company with people I liked, more books than I could ever possibly read, international travel. I was doing relatively well. So in a certain sense, Naomi, what is it you have to complain about, really? And I would love to come to you and say that what changed things for me was as a result of, a detailed economic and examination of the state we were in, and concern for that people who were younger than me were having a much tougher time than I was. Although I was aware of all those things, that's not really what did it. What changed things for me was something very, very specific. It was what was happening to a young Welsh American soldier in military detention in the States. And Bradley Manning, who 2 years after his arrest is still awaiting trial in the States on, he's accused of releasing diplomatic and military information to WikiLeaks. You probably already know this. At that point, he was detained in a very tough regimen of solitary confinement, which made it seem very much like he was being punished before coming to trial. And this is something that the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture would agree with me on, incidentally. And I can remember reading that article, which alerted me that, and I can remember still the very profound impact it had on me, the sort of visceral sense that this wasn't right and shouldn't be allowed to stand. But I think, as well as that visceral sense, I was also struck by the fact that because of his British connections, his mother's Welsh, Bradley spent a lot of his teenage years in Wales, that the British government should be doing a bit more to help him than it was at that time, which was nothing. And although I didn't realize it at the time, or fully appreciate it at the time, once you have a deep sense that something is wrong, and an inkling of what you might do about it, then you have a campaign. So I started doing something really straight down the line and middle of the road and conventional. I started writing letters. I wrote letters to MPs, I wrote letters to other people I thought might be able to help. And then I moved online, and I started doing what I now know are the basic elements of any online campaign. I made my case online, backed it up with evidence, started talking to and convincing people who were talking about similar kinds of things, then talking to and convincing people who were talking about less similar kinds of things, but there was a connection, building up a network and a broad coalition. I started contacting people in the media and people in politics and other people with, a public presence who might be able to help. And only once all of that was in place, and it was a great network of really varied and experienced people who had much more expertise than me and knew a lot more than what was going on than me, that we worked together and organized an event on the ground at the most politically opportune moment. We succeeded in bringing the British dimension of Bradley's case to the front pages of national newspapers, and with the help of Anne Clwyd, we also took it into Parliament and challenged the Foreign Office directly. at which point they were forced to do something about it. And I would like to think that bringing this aspect of Bradley's case to the fore was helpful. And it came in the context of a lot of activism happening, not just in the UK, also in the States and across Europe. And at the end of April last year, Bradley was moved to improved conditions. He's still, his pretrial process is still going on, incidentally, and it's something that deserves more attention than it usually gets. But what I took from this experience was actually something very profound, a very profound realization that you can have an impact on a political story which is taking place on the widest, biggest stage you can imagine, really, with very, very limited resources. I did most of what I did with a WordPress blog and a Twitter account, both of which are free. At a certain point in the process, it became useful to have a phone, but I never needed an office. And if I look at what was happening elsewhere at this time last year, I can see that realization taking hold in a much broader way, with lots of different people, which brings us neatly on to Occupy Wall Street. And even though the sort of precursors of Occupy are, you can look back and you can see it and it's kind of obvious. There are online activists in the States making the difficult transition to doing things in the real world. And of course, there's this amazing thing that happens in Spain. We have hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets. For some reason, it's the presence of people saying, we are the 99%, and putting down tents in the heart of New York's financial district that really seems to change things. And it releases a lot of energy. And at the point something happens in New York, it's almost inevitable. There's a feeling of inevitability that something's going to happen in London. I find out about the London plans in the same way as most people do. I stumble across one of the 5 different Facebook pages which are going, hey, let's do something in London. And a couple of emails later, I'm part of a group of people sitting around the table thinking, okay, how can we make this happen? And we had no idea we thought that something was going to happen. We had no idea how. We had no idea that we were going to end up outside St. Paul's Cathedral for 5 months. For one thing, we were aiming to occupy outside the stock exchange. And I'm not going to say that everything that happened during that time was perfect, but I think there's definite parts of it that are interesting, significant, and show us how sort of political engagement is changing and how people's engagement with politics is going to change going forward. And the first thing I'd like to point out is that it all happened incredibly quickly. The sort of preparatory period to the 15th of October only took a couple of weeks. And as I said, it was a real momentum that drove us forward during this time. But even when the occupation started on that amazingly sunny Saturday, within 72 hours, the whole sort of basic infrastructure of a small village was in place. Shelter, food, sanitation, legal support, internet, it was all there. And none of this had to be consciously directed. I think we'd made provision for a generator to turn up on day 2 if we'd managed to stay overnight. But everything else just happened. And it happened because everybody had a sense that they were working towards the same thing, a common idea of what we were doing. And so you didn't need a hierarchy to tell you, do this, do that, do that. And when you have that sense of solidarity, that everyone's working towards the same thing, horizontal organization is incredibly efficient. I'm not sure we would have been able to do what we did had we tried to direct it. So there's that. The other thing that really stands out for me about Occupy is that people started organizing, as I say, around a common idea. And that idea of, I'm watching my time right now, that idea of the 99%. And this feeds into sort of the needing to use social media to do this kind of thing, both for the speed and also simple ideas travel very quickly on online media. But there's another dimension to this, which I think is worth thinking about, and it's that Occupy never asked that everybody had all the answers. It merely asked that you understood that certain questions were important. Occupy Wall Street, in one of their statements, put this very well. If you identify with the aims of this movement, then it is yours. You didn't have to sign up to a program to join Occupy. You merely had to understand that, we are the 99% is something I identify with and I identify strongly. And I may not understand necessarily why I want to be there on that Saturday and join you, but I think it's important that I'm going to do that. So it's in the nature of broad-based movements like Occupy that you bring in people who, like me, a short time before had been an accidental activist or a first-time activist. And it's that lowering the barriers to participation and not being programmatic about what people should do, enabling people to come and work it out for themselves, which I think gives us a route forward. Now, one of the hazards of being involved with something like Occupy is you occasionally get people assuming that you're accusing you of having some kind of ulterior motive. And at this point, I'll be straight with you. You know, I do have an agenda. And what I would really like is for ordinary people to understand the power that they wield and maybe don't appreciate. Because we can all, especially given the resources now at our disposal, which are more accessible and cheaper than ever before, make an impact on the world. If you make your case and back it up and talk to people and broadcast what you think and make the right links. I've called this talk "How I Became an Accidental Activist," but I think that ultimately we want to break down this barrier between activism and just being a citizen. In the same way that we can see now that it's a mistake leaving politics up to the politicians, I think it would also be an error to leave activism or political activity outside Parliament, outside places like this, to people who do it all the time. It's really a responsibility of all of us to stand up and do something. Even if you don't have the answers, raising the questions is incredibly important. And I think only by doing that can we really raise the standard of our democracy. Thank you very much. Thank you.